Welcome to This Explainer. For over a century, Sherlock Holmes has absolutely captivated our imaginations. But let's be honest, passively reading about his brilliant deductions is one thing. Actually making them yourself? That is an entirely different beast. Today, we're diving deep into the ultimate interactive adaptations of Arthur Conan Doyle's legendary work. We're going to unpack exactly how modern gaming lets you step right out of the shadows and become the great detective yourself.
So here's the real question. Can you actually outsmart Sherlock Holmes, or will you just end up as another lost Baker Street Irregular? It's a seriously daunting challenge. We're about to step right through the doors of 221B Baker Street, exploring two very distinct but equally brilliant mediums that let you live out your greatest detective fantasies. So grab your magnifying glass, because the devil is absolutely in the details.
Now, before we really get going, we need to talk about what exactly makes a deductive narrative experience. These aren't just your standard puzzle games where you're matching colors or blasting through waves of enemies. No, these are interactive experiences where you have to actively use pure logic, piece together clues, and explore to unravel some incredibly complex mysteries. They are deeply immersive narratives designed to rigorously test your intellect. You aren't just along for the ride, you are the engine driving the entire investigation forward.
All right, let's jump right into Part 1, the analog masterpiece, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective.
Originating way back in 1981, this cooperative game does something super clever. It casts 1 to 8 players not as Holmes himself, but as the Baker Street Irregulars, his trusty network of street urchins, and you are handed 10 hard-as-nails cases. In these standalone boxes, which are currently published by Space Cowboys, you are literally tracing evidence through 19th century London. I'm talking unfolding massive physical maps, poring over these thick, detailed case booklets, and scanning reproductions of local newspapers for tiny, seemingly insignificant clues. It's tactile, it's completely analog, and it's just wonderfully brilliant. But listen, if you're going to survive these cases, you need a game plan. The folks over at Room Escape Artists put together some fantastic pro tips for consulting detective that are absolutely crucial. First off, reserve a couple of hours for gameplay. You really can't rush this. Second, be ready for a lot of out loud reading. The lore is super dense. Third, take incredibly good notes and revisit them constantly if you want to connect the dots. And most importantly, play for yourself, not for the game's scoring system. Doing detective work here requires serious focus, crazy attention to detail, and frankly, a few massive leaps of faith.
Speaking of that scoring system, be warned. 1/10, that incredibly humbling fraction, represents the reality of what your final score will probably look like. See, at the end of a grueling case, you compare your investigative steps directly to Sherlock's, and because Sherlock Holmes is, well, Sherlock Holmes, players usually find themselves scoring a fraction of his perfect 100 points. Where he takes maybe 3 seemingly magical steps to solve a murder, you might take 30 agonizing ones. The game absolutely does not pull its punches.
But hey, please don't let that discourage you. As Room Escape Artists perfectly pointed out, while they wished the scoring system felt a bit more sensible, it really didn't matter because they could just judge their own improvement. The true joy of this analog experience isn't about the math. It's about the convivial, cooperative deduction with your friends. Debating wild theories over a cup of coffee on a rainy afternoon, that is way more rewarding than just trying to mathematically beat the master sleuth at his own game.
Which brings us to Part 2, the digital evolution, focusing on the Frogwares video game series. Over the last 20 years, developer Frogwares has taken us on a pretty incredible journey. Looking at this timeline, you see the evolution from their early PC point-and-click titles like 2002's The Mystery of the Mummy, right through to breakout narrative hits like 2014's Crimes and Punishments, and then all the way up to recent semi-open world and even Lovecraftian crossover titles like Chapter 1 and the 2023 remake of The Awakened. It's this fascinating journey of technological and narrative growth from a single franchise dedicated to capturing Arthur Conan Doyle's world. And what really stands out here is the consistency. If we look at the Metacritic scores over the years, whether it's versus Jack the Ripper back in 2009 hitting a 73, Crimes and Punishments at 73, or the Awakened remake bumping up to a 76, Frogwares has consistently delivered solid, engaging experiences. They are firmly planted in that mid-budget AA gaming space. They know exactly what their niche is, and they serve their fanbase incredibly well. I actually love this grounded take from Reddit user That Drama King, who said, "If you are a Sherlock Holmes fan, play it. It's good, just not amazing or anything." I think that hits the nail on the head. While these digital games definitely have their quirks, maybe some stiff animations, clunky controls, or that classic Eurojank, they are still a highly enjoyable, incredibly atmospheric way to virtually step into Holmes's shoes. The environments are rich, the voice acting is charming, and the thrill of actually interrogating suspects in real time, it's just undeniable.
Let's move on to part 3, analog versus digital, comparing the experiences.
When you put them side by side, the contrast is pretty stark. The analog board game is this deep, intellectual, social exercise. It is all about heavy reading, cooperative gameplay, intense note-taking, pure logic, and literally poring over physical maps. Meanwhile, the digital video games offer a deeply immersive, third-person, single-player vibe. The focus shifts entirely to visual exploration, interactive environmental puzzles, reading suspects' faces during interrogations, and occasionally throwing a punch in an action sequence.
Then there's the time commitment. 90? That's the average number of minutes it takes to complete just a single case in the Consulting Detective board game. And remember, there are 10 cases in a box, so this isn't some quick distraction. Grinding through a single case is a robust, evening-filling event for you and your friends. It demands your undivided attention. Now contrast that with 18.5. That is the average number of hours it takes a solo player to beat a full digital title like Crimes and Punishments. It is a much longer, continuous narrative journey. You dictate the pace of your own personal investigation over several days or even weeks, getting completely lost in those fog-filled streets of London.
As the PlayStation Store describes it, these digital titles are an experience that will test the limits of your nerves and intelligence, asking you to untangle a web of intrigue, lies, and misdirection. And that's exactly it. In the video games, you get this intense, semi-open world freedom, paired with the incredibly heavy weight of making moral choices. You often have to decide right there on the spot whether to hand a culprit over to Scotland Yard or let them walk free, entirely based on your own internal compass.
But hey, the board games are equally revered for a reason. The Guardian called Consulting Detective the most exciting take on the genre-defining investigator, challenging you to scour the streets of London and crack a succession of baffling cases. It really goes to show that regardless of whether you prefer holding a controller or flipping through a casebook, both of these mediums offer world-class detective fantasies that deeply, deeply respect the original source material.
So that brings us to part 4. Choose your detective path, the ultimate verdict. Ultimately, your choice really boils down to this. If you want instant, visually immersive solo journeys into the mind of the detective, complete with action sequences and tough moral choices, the digital bundles from Frogwares are going to pull you right into the narrative. On the flip side, if you want a demanding, shared tabletop challenge that will truly test the collective intellect of you and your friends through dense reading and uncompromising logic, Space Cowboys analog boxes are the way to go.
Which leaves us with one final, provocative question for you to ponder. Will you gather your friends for a demanding tabletop mystery, poring over maps and newspapers by lamplight? Or will you explore the gritty streets of Victorian London completely solo with a controller in your hands? The game is afoot. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope it helps you find your inner detective. Until next time, keep deducing.